A form of tribalism called asabiya is discussed in Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah, an early text taking a universal approach to this discipline. Hegel claimed the owl of Minerva flew only in the aftermath of this concept, which he attributed to the Weltgeist or world spirit in a series of lectures that claim Africa does not possess this concept. Giambattista Vico discussed the cyclical nature of this concept in his The New Science. Thomas Carlyle popularized the great man theory of this discipline. Echoing Hegel, Karl Marx claimed this thing repeats itself, first as tragedy, then as farce. For 10 points, name this field whose early practitioners included Thucydides and Herodotus. And the answer is history. A theorist from this country used the kick-dancing Tiller girls to illustrate his concept of the mass ornament. Two philosophers from this country coined the term culture industry and wrote Dialectic of Enlightenment. A philosopher from this country argued that the modern ability to duplicate art causes works to lose their aura in an essay on art in the age of mechanical reproduction. A philosopher from this country explained one concept using a term translated as sublation and formulated a master-slave dialectic. For 10 points, name this birth country of Theodor Adorno, Walter Benjamin, and G.W.F. Hegel. And the answer is the Federal Republic of Germany. This philosopher quoted another man's first principles of demonstration in a passage that states that no one can mentally admit the opposite of what is self-evident. A text by this philosopher takes an argument from The Governance of the World. That text by this philosopher borrows from another thinker by defining motion as reducing something from potentiality to actuality, and includes sets of objections followed by contradicting statements introduced with the Latin phrase sed contra. This philosopher argued that God is the first efficient cause in his 5 proofs for God's existence. For 10 points, name this author of the Summa Theologica. And the answer is St. Thomas Aquinas. A text by this philosopher organizes various instances agreeing in the form of heat into a table of presentation. Denis Diderot's taxonomy of knowledge was inspired by this philosopher's division of the human mind into memory, imagination, and reason. An allegorical book by this philosopher is set at an ideal school on the island of Ben Salem. This philosopher theorized 4 fallacies called the idols of the cave, the tribe, the theater, and the marketplace in a text proposing his namesake method. For 10 points, name this British philosopher of The New Atlantis and Novum Organum who emphasized an empiricist and inductive scientific method. And the answer is Sir Francis Bacon. A philosophical text written in this language argues against the belief that fire burns cotton, instead declaring that cotton is burned by God. Followers of a philosopher who wrote in this language argued for the possible coexistence of differing philosophical and religious truths, a doctrine referred to as double truth. A text in this language denounces 20 heretic views stated by other philosophers, such as the pre-eternity of the world and ordinary causality. The incoherence of the philosophers and the incoherence of the incoherence were written in this language, which was also used to write commentaries on Aristotle by Averroes. For 10 points, name this language used by the Muslim philosopher Al-Ghazali. And the answer is Arabic. A text by this philosopher distinguishes between 2 forms of self-love by tracing one back to village music contests. That text by this philosopher defines the distinction between man and animal as perfectibility, or the ability of man to learn by observing others. This philosopher argued that private property was created when the first man fenced in a piece of land to declare it his. This author of Discourse on Inequality distinguished between the government and the sovereign of the general will in a book that declares that man is born free and everywhere he is in chains. For 10 points, name this philosopher of the social contract. And the answer is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. A text by this philosopher states that belief in the absolute mind permits a moral holiday and offers contrasting pluralistic and monistic interpretations of Walt Whitman's To You. Another work by this thinker presents the title concept as a mediating philosophy between tough-minded and tender-minded philosophers. This philosopher used the term cash value to describe practical reasons for holding certain beliefs. With Charles Peirce, this man developed a branch of philosophy he called a new name for some old ways of thinking. For 10 points, name this American philosopher of the will to believe and pragmatism. And the answer is William James. An essay associated with this school of philosophy foresees an era in which men will hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, and criticize after dinner. A philosopher from this school of thought postulated an epistemological break in its central thinker's ideas and coined the term ideological state apparatus. Philosophers from this school, like Louis Althusser and Georgy Lukács, follow a thinker who stated in a letter, "From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs." That thinker, central to this school, used a philosophy of dialectical materialism to analyze class struggle. For 10 points, name this school of philosophy named after the author of Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto. And the answer is Marxism. In the chapter Stultifera Novis, this philosopher links the emergence of the Ship of Fools motif to the decline of leprosy in Europe. A book by this philosopher contrasts a description of a timetable with the public execution of Robert Francois Damiens. This philosopher coined the term episteme to refer to the historical forces in which knowledge is embedded as part of his genealogical method for analyzing power in society. This philosopher described the creation of the medical gaze in his book The Birth of the Clinic. For 10 points, name this French philosopher of the order of things and discipline and punish. And the answer is Michel Foucault. Galen Strawson asserts that this concept leads to an infinite regression in his basic argument against this concept. Alvin Plantinga's defense against the argument from evil is named for this concept. Daniel Dennett's elbow room uses intuition pumps to explain this concept. Duration is defined as the immediate data of consciousness in a Henry Bergson book titled For Time and This Concept. Compatibilist philosophers argue that this concept and determinism are not mutually exclusive. For 10 points, name this philosophical concept, the ability to choose between possible actions. And the answer is free will.